When we open our Bibles, the Old Testament starts with two creation accounts, Genesis 1 verse 1 to 2 verse 4 and Genesis 2 verse 4 to 225. In the 5th century BCE, the first creation account was conceived by the priestly authors, who reinterpreted Babylonian myths through a Jewish lens. Their main motivation was to remind that Yahweh was still in control of the nation's fate, and to motivate why Yahweh should not be abandoned for the Babylonian gods. In an attempt to do this, they took popular Babylonian myths and reinterpreted them in such a way that it pointed away from other gods and to the sovereignty of Yahweh. In episode 14, we looked at the Babylonian creation myth of Enuma Elish. Today, we are going to look at the similarities and many differences between Genesis 1 and Enuma Elish. Both these narratives start in a similar fashion. Genesis 1 verse 2. The earth was formless and empty, and darkness covered the deep waters, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the waters. Enuma Elish starts with, when there was no heaven, no earth, no height, no depth, no name, when Apsu was alone, the sweet water, the first begetter, and Tiamat, the bitter water. Both these narratives start with the idea that nothing existed. In Enuma Elish, only the primordial waters of Apsu and Tiamat existed. In Genesis, we also find a reference to formless water. It is out of this water that all earth and heavens were created. The big difference between these two narratives can also be found in the beginning of the Genesis account. In Enuma Elish, we find that the earth and heavens could only be created after a battle. The priestly authors wanted to show that Yahweh had the ability and power to create heaven and earth only through his words. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. The way heaven and earth were created are also similar in the two narratives. In Enuma Elish, Marduk cuts Tiamat in half, the top of her holding the waters up and the bottom keeping the waters down, with a gap in the middle where people, animals, and plants could live. Genesis 1 verse 6, then God said, "Let there be a space between the waters, to separate the waters of the heavens from the waters of the earth." Both narratives explain the creation of mankind, but we find different motivations for their creation. In Enuma Elish, mankind is created to assist the gods in their tasks, making mankind inferior to the gods. In Genesis, however, mankind is created in the image of the gods, placing them at the top of all of creation. Interestingly, we find a glimpse into the belief systems of the Judeans here. Genesis 1 verse 26, then God said, "Let us make human beings in our image, to be like us." The question is, who were us? Although some Christians choose to skim over this reference to other gods, it clearly points to the fact that, throughout Israel's history, they accepted that there were multiple gods. It was only much later that various authors, like the priestly authors for example, tried to convince the nation that only one God existed. The aim of the priestly authors was to show how Yahweh was in ultimate control, and that the heavenly bodies were simply parts of his creation. This trumped the popular myth of Enuma Elish, where the heavenly bodies were also gods. Genesis 1 tells the story of a God that needed no other elements to create earth and heaven, a God that had the power to create through his words only, a God that created a good and moral universe, a God that was in total control of his creation and history as the Judeans knew it, a God that was worthy of their worship. In the next episode, we are going to study another Mesopotamian myth, the Epic of Gilgamesh, and how this myth contributed to the second creation narrative of Genesis 2, plus the flood narrative of Genesis 6 to 9.